Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka it is week three of the power rankings that I will be releasing every week for the foreseeable future. So definitely smash that subscribe button, give that thumbs up, and stay tuned for the latest power rankings that you will see for Pokemon Pocket. Let's get to it. So one of the reasons why I do these power rankings is that so you have a chance to see somewhat of a perspective into the tournament scene. And if you haven't checked out the tournaments that are on limitlesstcg.com, you should definitely head on over there, click the tournaments button, and then you can filter and check Pokemon Pocket so that way you can see the upcoming Pokemon tournaments. And I just want to highlight that there's like 4 banger events going on this weekend with over 300 participants in each of them, but I want to highlight one of them in particular, and that is the Pocket League Legends number 8 tournament. You should definitely check out their Discord, definitely come join the community. One of the nicest groups of people that I've been around so far in Pokemon Pocket, and there's other great content creators in there as well as other great players and just a great community. Don't forget there's Ursi's just gigantic tournament that she's been doing an amazing job of hosting as well. So there's lots of options, but I always want to make sure that at least, a couple of times a week I'm telling you, hey, come check out Pokemon Pocket Legends League, because they also do special formats on Wednesday. I know a lot of people are getting a little tired of Pikachu and Mewtwo dominating. And by the way, one thing about it is they did like a singleton tournament and Pikachu still won, but that's a whole nother topic. So anyways, definitely check them out. I'll leave a link in the description to the Discord as well, but let's get into the power rankings and what you all came for. All right, look, it's mini me. I'm at the top right. It's mini me, mini MBB. So I actually updated a few rankings, and I'm just going to run through this as well as new deck list attached to these rankings too. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that I changed on the past week's power rankings. So this is week 3. If you go watch the video for week 2, just in case you haven't seen it, there's a ton of deck lists. It's probably the best video to watch before you dive into this one if you haven't seen it yet. So definitely check that out. I'll try to leave that link or I'll try to pop it up at the end of the video. But basically, this is kind of the new refreshed rating for the Raichu and Lieutenant Surge deck. And by the way, the person that I went ahead and used for the deck list has been topping like multiple events with this exact build. So I would say that it's pretty fine-tuned. And I went ahead and wanted to make sure that I just updated that. I updated the rankings as well because I did, I believe I made a little bit of a slight change in some of the ratings. But again, it's still roughly the same critiques for this deck list. So let's get to the next deck. So I also made updates on the 5 basic Mewtwo and Gardevoir list. So this one is particularly talking about the Jinx version, which by the way, there was a Reddit post that did a really good job breaking down like what cards are winning, what matchups it's winning. It was a really good post. And it was really cool because, I talk about some things in the videos, but I don't always get to show you guys each piece of data that I'm using, and that Reddit post did a phenomenal job of taking those data points and putting it into one place. And it basically was saying a lot of the same things that I've been saying about Mewtwo and the base Mewtwo, and then Mewtwo and the Jinx variation. It basically said the same thing. And then obviously Red Card, which is a topic that's been beat to a pulp by now. But I did upgrade these rankings as well, and the overall points for the 5 basic Mewtwo list is now sitting at 19 out of 25, which roughly is a 3.8 out of 5, and it is going to be the second highest rating next to Pikachu. And the thing about it is, like, these two decks are going to go back and forth against each other, right? Like, that's just something that you kind of have to know going into it. And the past couple weekends, Mewtwo's been winning, but again, like, this is the base Mewtwo version, by the way. But again, and it's got roughly the same ratings. I think the early game is slightly weaker for the base Mewtwo version, just because you're not attacking if you open with the base Mewtwo very early. But if you open with Jinx, you potentially are attacking a little bit early. So I went ahead and made that adjustment in the ratings. But still, they're both the same, overall score. And again, like, Mewtwo's won probably the past 2 weekends, more tourneys, especially head to head in the championship games, over Pikachu. But just like the overall like ease of playing Pikachu, and just like not having to worry necessarily about a ton of evolutions and on curve and everything. You're basically just slapping stuff down and attaching energy and just attacking. And granted, Mewtwo's not too much different. Like, you can pretty much do the same thing with Mewtwo, except you're evolving, a stage 2. I just gave a little bit of an edge on the ratings and on the paper ratings to Pikachu still. But you could definitely make the argument that Mewtwo may be better head to head. If you played the match 1,000 times, but again, this is just kind of showing you the updated rankings. Neither of the Mewtwo list have changed on my end. I still do believe in Giovanni. That was one thing that the Reddit post did not believe in. So let's also get to another updated ranking. This is actually going to be the Arcanine EX and Moltres EX deck. I went ahead and basically updated a couple of the ratings that I gave it. And like, the thing about this deck is, you don't have to play the fossils, right? Like, you can probably just play like, some people are playing freaking Pokedex, for goodness sake. Some people are just playing, an extra Sabrina. Some people are playing, just 2 fossils and no Aerodactyl. So, there's still different variations. But this is just kind of the first deck list that we saw hit the scene. But, I do think that overall, Arcanine EX and Moltres is probably, about as good as a fire deck can get against, stuff like a Pikachu. Because, again, Charizard is just going to have that advantage of just being able to outbulk Mewtwo. So, like, the Arcanine EX is going to beat Pikachu. The Charizard EX is going to beat Mewtwo a lot of the time, right? Not every time, but a lot of the time. And the trade-off is going to be that, Arcanine EX is a stage 1, whereas, Charizard is a stage 2, so you can start to see that there might be less play rate as time goes on of Charizard and more play rate of Arcanine. The big question is, how do you make the Mewtwo matchup better? A lot of people are trying to play things like Farfetch. They're trying to play things like Kangaskhan. But again, that like detracts from like your early game of trying to open Moltres and Growlithe. So, the mystery's still out there. And, again, I still do kind of think that we're probably, close to just a 2-deck format with Pikachu and Mewtwo. And, basically no other deck is going to really have, a great chance to beat both of them. But again, I did upgrade this rating. It should now be on par with the Charizard deck's rating. All right, so let's get to another big upgrade that I did on the power rankings. I downgraded a lot of stuff on Venusaur EX and Exeggutor. I've had time to really think about this and kind of have a little bit more of, my mind wrapped around this. And like, I think that my biggest point about Venusaur and Exeggutor is it just doesn't do that many unfair things. Like, when you take a look at Moltres is ramp, right? You're breaking the rules of Pokemon by attaching extra energy. When you take a look at Pikachu, it's the most aggressive basic Pokemon in the entire game because its damage can scale from 30 to 60 to 90, and then to 100 with Giovanni. And that's for 2 energy, like, that's just great value. And on top of that, you get to play a lot of other flexible Pokemon, like a Zeb Sniper, like an Electrode, like a Raichu, like a Zapdos EX that can, soak damage, or they can deal damage, they can finish things off. It's just a really good, consistent deck that does pretty unfair things, and then when you take a look at Mewtwo, again, Mewtwo is, it's got bulk, it's dealing 150, and also it's got ramp in the form of Gardevoir. Granted, it's a stage 2, but again, there's no coin flip with that stage 2. It's just once per turn, boom, extra energy, boom, extra energy. So it's fuel, right? But the most unfair thing that Venusaur EX is going to do is heal, right? The most unfair thing that Exeggutors are going to do is like knock out a basic Pokemon with by flipping a heads, and hopefully it evolved on curve, but it's just not doing a lot of unfair things when you compare it to the top tier decks. Even a deck like a Misty deck, right? Like an Articuno Starmie, or a Starmie Greninja, or a Starmie Poliwrath. Hey, shout out to that deck. I love that deck. But, Misty can be an unfair card. And really, like, again, you look at this deck list, like, the most unfair thing it does is, oh man, they evolved Exeggutor. early and then knocked down my basic and then they healed. Like, okay, like that's just a coin flip. I mean, it's just a good value card, right? Like these are just a collection of good value cards. Venusaur, bulkiest Pokemon in the game, right? It's healing, it's dealing 100. Exeggutor, very tanky stage 1 that's able to heal and extend its life, right? And if it flips heads, it just so happens to do slightly more damage, But again, I just don't think that this deck does enough unfair things, even though, I love the deck. If I was going to go play in a tournament this weekend, this is probably the deck that I'm bringing, just to be real honest, just because I like the deck. But again, I tried to basically look at this from another point of view, and I have lowered a lot of the ratings. Again, it's just dependent on Exeggutor. If you don't get Exeggutor early, on your second turn, you might be just like out of luck, because Pikachu decks might be hitting you for 90, knocking out your Ivysaur or your Bulbasaur or your egg, right? The egg that hasn't evolved. So, there's just a lot of bad case scenarios that can happen, as well as like the random donks with stuff like Farfetch'd, right? So again, just being a little bit more realistic with this deck. And even though I do love this deck, I do think it's great. It's probably one of the more fair decks in the game that can compete with the top 2 decks. But it's just, again, it just doesn't do enough unfair things, in my opinion. Which segues me into a deck that I think is even worse, right? Like I think Venusaur EX and Lilligant is just strictly worse. And it's worse for a lot of reasons, right? Like one of the big reasons why it's worse is the bulk. Right, 100 HP on Lilligant, it's just not enough, right? Pikachu is just going to probably one-shot this. Obviously, Mewtwo one-shots it when it gets to that 4 energy threshold. And then, like, it's not like you can play Lilligant, like, in the middle of the game and, like, feel like it's really doing much, because it's just going to be dealing 50 damage and maybe ramping something on your bench that never comes into play. At least with Exeggutor, you've got that 130, or you got that, 160. You got that big body, right, that you can heal, right, with Erica. But I mean, like, if you're using Erica on Lilligant, it just doesn't really feel that great, even though it may help you survive at least one more turn. So I just think that this deck just strictly does worse than Exeggutor Venusaur, right? I just think it is strictly worse. Like, is it cool when you on curve Lilligant and all of a sudden you're ramping your Venusaur and all of a sudden you're curving your Venusaur? Like, yes, but the thing is, if you did that same thing with Exeggutor, it would be the same result, right? Like it's the same result, except now you're bulkier, right? So I just think that this deck does a lot of things worse than the Exeggutor Venusaur list. And, even though, people may think, oh, I love Lily. I just think it's just strictly worse. And the other thing that I would also throw out there is there's 3 ways that I can evolve my Execute. There's only 2 ways that you can evolve your petals here, right? So again, even that extra stage 1 consistency makes it a little bit better, in my opinion. So again, I just think that this deck struggles to win without Venusaur, whereas the other deck with Venusaur and Exeggutor, at least Exeggutor can carry a long portion of the game before you get to that Venusaur, which was my whole game plan with the deck, right? Get to that mid game, get to that late game, have a Venusaur built up, bring it in after you've dealt damage or knocked out my Exeggutors, and hopefully, sweep with Venusaur. Which, by the way, this is why I gave it a 3 out of 5 rating, which honestly is still not that bad compared to some of the other like decks that you'll see on the scale, but again, just not a deck that I would bring to any tournament. So Marowak EX and Pidgeot was a deck that people talked about in the comments, and I had seen, I think another content creator maybe did a video about it. I just think this deck is bad. Like it's got a 14.5 rating, 2.9 out of 5, and like here's the thing, like if you're winning with Marowak, like you are going to win with any version of Marowak pretty much already, right? I don't think that Pidgeot really adds much to this deck, right? Like, why don't I just play Sabrina, and why don't I just play a stage 1 that can swing at just as consistently, right? Like, granted, I'm going to lose some bulk, right? Because that 130 HP is kind of bulky for Pidgeot. But the games that I don't get to evolve Pidgeot because I don't hit the pieces in time are probably worse than the games that I would, oh man, my Sandslash has 100 HP, so I lost, So again, like, I just don't think that this deck is very good. I think that, it's cool that Kangaskhan can come in early and, chip some damage while you build up your Marowak or while you evolve your Pidgeot. I do think that, hey, Hitmonlee has some cool, uses where it can come in and snipe. But again, and even when you get to the mid to late game, sure, the solid retreat costs except for Kangaskhan pretty much, right? So you're able to pivot, pretty well, or just soak damage on that Kangaskhan and eventually just let it get knocked out. But again, like you start talking about the power, the consistency, it's just a lot of coin flips, right? It's a lot of coin flips. And then when you take a look at the fact that it's a stage 2 as well, that you're also like not sure that you're going to get value out of, like, hey, dude, you could have Pidgeot out on the board and it just does like nothing, right? The ability doesn't help you. All you're doing is attacking for 70 with it. And if that's going to be the case, why wouldn't I just play Sandslash, right? Why wouldn't I just substitute Sandslash, get some more trainers in here, and heck, I could still play the Hitmonlee and the Kangaskhan, So again, I just think this deck is just strictly worse, and I would just rather play fighting. That's just my thoughts, though. Let me know what you think in the comments. And just a reminder, if there's other decks that you want to see, tell me in the comments, because I think I've covered, close to like 15, almost 20 decks now on these power rankings. All right, so this is actually my sleeper for the weekend. My sleeper for the weekend is going to be this Arbok and Weezing deck. I don't know that it's going to be this exact deck list, but I don't like Muck, and I'm not sure about Nidoking. I haven't been able to jam any games with it, but it just seems like adding another evolution line probably isn't great. Compared to just adding cards that make your deck already better, right? Like potions, X-Speeds, red card, and a tournament scene, right? Giovanni to hit extra damage thresholds, Sabrina to, potentially stall or clinch a game or lock my opponent with Arbok. Like, yeah, I just think that these choices are probably better than just playing like a stage 1 that, takes a lot of time to get going and honestly, may or may not do anything, right? So let's just talk about these ratings for a second. So early game, I gave it a 3 out of 5, 2 stage 1s that can pressure for pretty cheap, right? 2 energy or 1 energy. And again, when you take a look at the mid to late game, it does have a high retreat cost, but it kind of gets offset by, obviously X speed, but it also gets kind of offset by Koga, because Koga will allow you to pivot into your Arbok sometimes at just the right time. So that way you can have a Pokemon that's poisoned and trap it, right? Because that's the main reason why this deck is good, in my opinion, right? It's the fact that hopefully you're able to chip into a KO early game, and so now you've got 1 KO down, and hopefully in the late game or the mid game, right, you can then trap one of your opponent's EX Pokemon with Arbok and seal the game that way, right? Like, that's the way that this deck beats Pikachu, right? The deck beats Pikachu by stealing an early knockout, whether it's Poison and Weezing or whether it's, 1 Arbok and a Weezing, and then it wins the game by trapping a Zapdos EX or trapping an EX that's already got damage on it and just, chipping out, basically outracing it, right? You outrace that Zapdos EX and make it to where, hey, they can't retreat because you're hitting it with Arbok, and you win the game before they can retreat. And so that's kind of the idea behind that. And then the dark matchup going into Mewtwo, not bad either, because you can put really, really good pressure on an early Mewtwo while they're trying to, hit their Gardevoir curve and get that knockout. Now, it does get dicey when you start talking about decks like Arcanine EX. Like, the big thing that you're going to look for in that matchup is you're going to try to trap the Moltres. Like, any fire deck that plays Moltres, like, if you're an Arbok and Weezing player, you must target their Moltres. You must let that be the big thing that helps you win the game, right? And then hopefully you can take down their Arcanine, right? No pun intended. Get it? Because like Arcanine takedown. Anyways, so again, it's a pretty low damage scaling, right? 30 to 70 damage, not including the poison, but it attacks so early that, that is kind of the nice thing about it, right? And again, it's a pseudo stage 2 in the form of a trainer, right? In the form of supporter, right? You've got your coughing evolves into Weezing, and then Weezing depends on Koga to get put back into your hand. But again, it will rely on supporters. Not really any coin flips in this deck, so that's kind of cool. But I do think that this deck is arguably the best counter to, arguably the 2 best decks in the game, and it does have a win condition. It does have a path to victory against those Moltres EX decks that, maybe it may be Charizard, it may be Arcanine, it may be Centiskorch for all I know, right? So again, 15.5 out of 5 out of 25, which basically is about a 3.1 out of 5. I do think that this deck can continue to make noise as long as, you know, the person knows the deck and understands their win conditions. Moving on to another deck that people wanted to see, and I did talk about it the first power ranking I ever did, but here I am talking about it again just to make sure that I kind of like refreshed the ratings since the criterias did change a little bit in week 2. But this is a Sandslash and Primeape deck, and basically I started playing this deck because I hate coin flips sometimes. Like sometimes coin flips just drive me bananas, and so I couldn't play Marowak. So I built this deck, and the thing is, it can pressure really early, but when you start getting to that mid to late game where Sandslash is, you know, only dealing 70 and then getting one-shotted by your opponent's Pokemon, like that can be a little bit of a problem, right? And then the other thing is too is Primeape can just get to a point where like it's just too glassy, right? You can't put it out there because it just gets one shot. It can't even take a hit, so that way it's dealing 100. So you kind of are dependent to hit like certain things early in the game and certain evolutions early in the game, and like you're kind of dependent on like, you know, whether or not you go first or second sometimes. So even though it's not coin flip dependent, it kind of is in the sense that going first or second can literally just like mean you won or you lost. And I know that's like that for a lot of decks, but just you will feel that a lot more when you start playing a Mankey that kind of like has to put damage on itself, right? And then has to be able to evolve on curve. But again, it does have some favorable matchups, but again, it just lacks the bulk, in my opinion, to really put it over the top. And we've had this debate a couple times. You know, is it the Mankey or is it the Primeape? Like, what's the weak spot? And I do think that it's the Primeape. Like, I think if Primeape had like 110 HP or 120 HP, like, it'd probably be too good, right? Like, so I mean, again, like I think that's probably the main issue is Primeape is just a little bit too glassy, right? Like Sandslash is just kind of that tweener, right? It's that kind of in the middle Pokemon, right? But Primeape is just a little bit too glassy. So overall, these are what I went with for the rankings, and I want to make sure that you guys let me move my face to out of the way so you can see that, so that way it's on the record there. But there you go. I went ahead and ranked the top 10 decks in terms of rating, and let me make sure you guys can see all that. There we go. But again, you know, these rankings are just my thoughts along with like my reasoning kind of piled in there. And you know, you're obviously welcome to disagree, and if you disagree, definitely let me know in the comments. But again, I just want to say thank you all for tuning into my content, and you know, for taking time out of your day to, you know, watch the stuff, whether it's entertaining to you, whether you learn something, or whether it's just background noise. But again, Pikachu at the top, Mewtwo right there. It could probably be 1A, 1B in all reality. I don't know. I did that for 3 and I did that for 9, but I didn't do it for 1. But again, these are just my thoughts, and you may notice something like, hey, Venusaur is lower than Starmie EX and Articuno EX variants, even though it has a higher score. And the reason why I have it that way personally is just because I think that there's so many fire decks that it hurts it. And I also think that Articuno and Starmie EX decks, whether it's the Greninja variant or the Articuno EX, I think they just do more unfair things, right? Like I think attacking for 90 damage on your second turn and being able to free retreat pivot out of that is probably more unfair than the stuff that Exeggutor EX or base Exeggutor is doing on turn 2, 3, and 4 of the game, right? Obviously, you're going to have games where you get the nuts and Venusaur comes out on curve and you're just smacking your opponent and they can't touch you. You know, that's going to be the case, but you could argue the same thing for, you know, Misty and Articuno, right? Or Misty and our early Starmie, right? So just my thoughts. But again, you can see the total rankings there, and let me know what decks you want to see. But there should be some videos popping up here in a few seconds. And until next time, good luck in all the tournaments this weekend. Peace.